All right, so this is live. So hi, welcome. This is hopefully first of many short video sessions that describe technologies related to Checkbox, the Checkbox project. And here specifically, I'm going to talk about using Python3 QML together using Pyotherside to create applications that can run in Ubuntu, including Ubuntu Touch environments. All right, so this is live. So hi, welcome. This is hopefully first of and ever mistake of newbies like me of not closing the other browser window. So with that out of the way, I'm going to jump straight into the code. I'm going to screen share it. If you're watching this live and the font size or anything makes the text unreadable, just tell me as soon as you can. I made the text reasonably large. I think we're on the safe side. I'm actually going to show all the code in VI because for some reason Qt Creator, which is the typical environment we're working on the code with, just somehow doesn't register in Hangouts, so I can't really screen share just Qt Creator. I have to screen share my whole computer, and from experience that has bad quality on the whole video. So let's just get started with a VI window. Okay, so this is a short disclaimer. So I haven't really written any QML apps before. So if you're watching this later on and you see I'm talking about stuff that doesn't make any sense according to you, please correct me, write a comment on the video, because the point for this is both for me to express and show what we've got, what we learned, what we did, as well as for us to learn in the process. So let's make this bidirectional. So this is the main file of the project. I mean, this is a typical this is a typical Qt Creator created project with some of the code here is still boilerplate, old code that I haven't checked or changed. I mean, like unit tests, but most of it is typically standard. So this is written with Qt Quick and all of the Ubuntu components. I'm running Ubuntu 14.10, so the end of development as of this time, the under development unicorn release, and this may be relevant for you if you want to try this at home because of this line, which is importing Pyotherside. So Pyotherside is now packaged for Debian and for Ubuntu. I packaged it. This is version 1.2. There's 1.3 under development. I'm going to make sure it's also packaged as soon as it's released. And if you want to try this out on 14.10, on 14.04, there's a PPA. I'm going to add a link to the PPA later on when this video has been recorded. What you can try it out on any architecture, including ARM, which is interesting. So you can try this on ARM as well. So I'm not gonna go through everything here because some of those things are just not that interesting with regards to Python integration. I'm going to go through the general architecture of the code right now, as well as through all the Python-specific components. So first of all, we're using PageStack, which is one of the standard components provided by the Ubuntu SDK. Actually, before, I think there is a very simple thing I could do. Before I actually go through the code, I'm going to jump to a second terminal and just run it quickly and screen share that because I think it may be interesting. More interesting to see. Again, I have to screen share the whole computer because otherwise it doesn't work. So this is the application right now. It's really basic. I mean, there's really not much to it. There are just two items you can click on right here on the first screen. Providers and sessions. So sessions are a plain box concept and checkbox concept. These are in progress or finished testing sessions. So you started a new session, did some testing, and this is where all the results are, what all the artifacts are. And providers are container for specific test definitions. So if you write a provider that, I don't know, tests Blu-ray playback or Blu-ray recording or, I don't know, or accelerometer or sensors or anything, they get packaged in the provider, and this is the provider list. So one thing I want to show is that this is really speedy. I mean, this is a slow desktop by any standard. But the thing here is really speedy and responsive. And previously we wrote a C++-based application that tried to do kind of the same thing. And we found that the responsiveness was really bad and really, like, this is a really long list and it's super fluid. The responsiveness was really bad because at the time we were kind of inexperienced in writing QML plugins and because of multiple blocking calls throughout throughout the whole code base. So one thing that I want to highlight up front that Pyotherside that gets really right is that you don't have to do anything special to write the code correctly. I mean, you have to really try to write the code in a way that would make it hang, make it slow down in any case. One thing that makes this possible is that all of Python runs in a separate thread. So while QML is busy animating itself and doing anything else, Python is running on a separate thread. And the only way you talk between Python and QML most of the time is through asynchronous callbacks and messages. So that makes it really natural to write really simple code that's the typical Python code, including stuff we have originally from command line tools, which are totally different from UI tools without any event system or anything like that. That translates itself very well to QML with Pyotherside. There's one gotcha though, and I'm going to go through that in a moment. But first, just a quick overview. So okay, so to go back, so we have a list of sessions, and here I just have one. I just run plainbox to really don't do nothing, and this is a simple session. So just some attributes, and one of the standard QML with Ubuntu SDK components. This is like a list that displays a single value. Providers are equally simple. Most of those UI components are really simple because I'm still learning QML in the process. So it's like a subtitled list. So you have the name of the provider here, and there's a version underneath it. And again, you can see the same pattern being repeated in many places. So that's what the application does right now. And apart from actually, so all of the data is coming from Python, and everything else is written in QML. So this shows exactly the level of split between responsibilities. Later on, as we will actually add capability of running a test through this, all of that will stay in Python, and this will be just the user interface, which is translating itself well, I think, to the concept. So that was the quick introduction of what it looks like, and now let me unscreen share this and re-screen share the other window where I can show how that's achieved. So one thing I want to highlight is actually I ran this with QML scene on command line, and depending on how you develop this may be relevant or not. Typically, we do our Python development in virtualenv. So if your Python modules are hidden behind that virtualenv, you won't be able to get this to run from Qt Creator. One thing I found as a simple workaround for that is to develop the Python project you're working on locally as your user, so you can import it in just without the virtualenv, and then you can use Qt Creator. So right now I'm not doing that, but that's a quick way to get this to work. So as we saw, we have a page stack with multiple pages. The main page is just like a quick jump list to two different sections, so sessions and providers. And most of this is really, if you ever saw any QML code, most of this is really typical. There's nothing really fancy to it. And I'm pretty sure it can be improved by anyone more experienced in QML than I am. I'm using some things like loaders to asynchronously load components, and not load them initially when the whole QML engine is starting. Only load them when something is necessary. And this is important because some of those components, as we'll see in a moment, like the session index page, actually talks to Python. And if this wasn't wrapped in a loader, I saw this before because that was the first version. All of these Python calls would go, early when the application was starting up. And maybe this is good. Well, from one point of view, this is good because as soon as it's really done initializing, you won't have any slowdowns at all. But at the same time, as the application grows, you can't really do it because there's going to be a lot of things that are going to get initialized and set up and queried, and you just really want to do them, and at the time you actually need them. I think that's also important for battery life in general. If you're writing, this is a specific testing application, so it may not be that relevant for us, but I think in general that's a really good thing. So here I'm using a loader, and they're initially inactive. So both of these pages for listing sessions and providers are initially inactive, and they get activated once you tap on them, just like that. One thing, as I said, I haven't been writing any QML apps before, and one thing I did write are web apps. So I was trying to somehow map what I know about web apps, how they get developed, to QML, and maybe that's a mistake, but so far it works for me. And I've been trying to create those analogies like index pages, detail pages. If you ever used Django before, that will be very familiar. So this is the same thing I was trying to do here. It is interesting when you look at that. Is how do you pass data between pages? So you're looking at like an index page and want to go to detail of a specific object. How do you pass information between these pages? And I found a number of ways of doing that. I haven't really gotten any feedback if any of them is better than the others. So I'm going to go to that in a second. So okay, this is the basic structure of the main on the main view. The most important thing here, which I've skipped so far, is the Python section. So to use this, you actually have to have the Pyotherside import. As I said, this is version 1.2. 1.3 would be compatible. We'll just have more features. So if you have that at the time you're watching this video, it should be okay. So where is this? Sorry, here. Okay, so there are a couple of things I want to highlight here because there's a lot of really background behind this. So first, there's an identifier called Py, and initially when I was writing this, I wasn't really sure how to access a Python object which is defined in one QML file in another QML file. And I wasn't really sure about the scoping rules of QML and JavaScript because sometimes it's confusing which scope you're actually working with. So what I've learned now is that you can just have the Python component ID like Py here, and then you can refer to that name in all the other files. And it's important because I think every one of those components will load and instantiate the Python runtime, and you really want to have one. You don't want to have many. Just to have single state, to have data handling and everything else set up correctly. If you know Pyotherside better than I do, and no, this is not the case, then I would love to know that. So that's my impression so far. So the Python component has two interesting signals you can connect to. So an error is a signal that gets sent. Oh, sometimes maybe confusing the terminology between queued signals and slots and other signal meaning, but this is something just like a callback you can define. And Pyotherside calls this callback whenever you have a traceback or unhandled error, an exception from your Python code. So here I'm just logging into the console. I found that to be useful enough in the rare cases that it happens. The way I've architected this so far is that really this code is importing a lot of tested Python code that is using standard Python testing tools, and there's nothing really broken about that code as far as I know. And when I'm writing the GUI, I'm just focusing on writing like a thin layer of functions that help the GUI, and they're really Pyotherside specific. Need to do one more thing. I'm gonna unmute my friend here. So Dan, if you have any questions, I'm sorry for keeping you muted so far. So feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay, back to the code. So this is the error handler. This is something special. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but we need to actually read this one first. So on received, briefly, it's a callback that gets called when Pyotherside sends a message. I'm going to just explain what that is in a second, and there's no specific handler for that message. So it's just like a safety net. If there's a typo somewhere in Python, I will see like, oh, I sent a message, but it's not handled by anything. Okay, so once the Python component has been initialized, this is the uncompleted signal. I'm doing three things, as you see. I'm adding an import path Python, and I'm going to just quickly show how this looks like. So there's a Py directory, and inside that Py directory, I have some Python files. So I'm adding an import path to that, so that regardless of how this is installed, I can import stuff from there. I'm adding a handler for a message called logging-events. That's just going to console log whatever the data that's being passed from Python to QML is. And this is part of Pyotherside event handling message passing mechanism. You can do asynchronous calls, but apart from asynchronous calls, you can also send events from either Python or JavaScript and QML, and they will be handled by handlers that you register. So, for instance, you can have an asynchronous process. You can initiate it by having an asynchronous function call that's, for instance, returning immediately very quickly with an identifier of an asynchronous process that you've started. And then as you go, you will see messages being passed from Python to QML that, for instance, give you some updates on the process, right? So this is a way for both worlds to communicate. So here I'm using it actually for bridging the entire Python logging subsystem to QML. So anything that my Python code, specifically checkbox and plainbox here, logs using the standard logger logging module, I actually get it in Pyotherside for free. Sorry, I get it in QML for free. This is specifically very useful when you're running this from Qt Creator, because all of the logging messages will scroll down in the console in the bottom. I found it to be very, very useful. And the code for this is actually a separate module. I'm going to show this in a second, and you can easily slap it in any other application. You can reuse that. So that's it. And here I'm calling a method. Sorry, I'm importing a module, and this is really this is a really good example of what Pyotherside looks like in practice. So anything that you do, either importing a module or calling a function here, is asynchronous. So we're importing module checkbox-touch, which may take a while to import. I found that on ARM it's really slow, at least on the devices I was doing it. So this is the fact that this is all asynchronous is important, because at no time the application stops being responsive. And you can actually have things like meaningful splash screens or progress spinners or stuff like that. So the application will stay fluid while you do stuff in the background in another thread. So I'm importing checkbox-touch, and whoops, sorry. And this is this module here. It's specific to this application. And once it's imported, I'm just calling one function for it called setup logging, and I'm passing it an argument. You can call functions with just an argument list. You can't use keyword arguments. But here it's okay, because all this code was designed for this. I'm just passing the message ID that the logging subsystem should use when there's a logging message being sent. So here I'm using logging event. I just didn't want to hard code that. And this is the same value that I've used here. So let's just briefly jump here and look at the other file. So this is Python now. And this is the setup logging function. As far as I know, you can't really code method, you can't really call methods unless you just extract the object and make the method accessible. I mean, but that's okay. As far as I know, I haven't found this to be a problem. And here I'm just using Python 3.2 plus functionality for quick configuration of the logging subsystem using a dictionary. And I'm not going to go through this, because if you know this is going to be boring. If you don't know this is not going to be enough for you to understand. The other thing I want to highlight is that there's a handler called toPytherside, and it's being instantiated from this class that I wrote. It's called Pyotherside under X, and this is extensions. I'm going to try to upstream those extensions as I go and learn, better best practices and stuff like that. And this is just going to, as I said, bridge send events in response to logging with all the event data there. And I'm using the same event name that's been passed as argument here, so logging event. Okay, maybe very quickly, I'm going to have a quick look at this Pyotherside extension module. The interesting bits here is that when you're running Python within Pyotherside as a thread within a QML engine, like QML scene does, you have one more import you can do. It's Pyotherside itself. And this is very well documented on Pyotherside website. It's really simple at the same time, so you don't really have to, to do a lot of things to get it to work. What I'm using here is the send function. So I can send an event to Qt, to QML, to JavaScript there, and I'm just sending the stringified version of the logging event that had happened. And the event name I've selected for the logging. So briefly, I think I can show a couple of these here. Just let me increase the font size, maybe. Maybe not. What's going on? So anyway, here you can see that this is a message that was logged from Python. This is using one of those exemplary verbose formatters that have lots of details. But this is actually logged with console.log from QML. So it's really convenient for basically seeing what's happening in your existing Python code base. Okay, so this is it. So once the Python module is initialized, it can be used by other things. And indeed it will be. Let's jump to one of those first interesting pieces that I have here, the session index page. So those are in the components directory. Session index page right here, okay. And let's have a look. This will be actually quite short, apart from all the verbose documentation I've added here. This is really like a mix between a prototype and a brainstorm, and I'm trying to write down my ideas of what I want this specific application to do. So, yeah, sorry. I mean, those can be interesting for you if you're interested in checkbox, or can be confusing or just noise if you're just interested in Pyotherside. So let's go over this one quickly. So it's a simple page that says sessions in the header above. There's a Python list model, which is something I wrote recently. I'm going to talk about this in a second. But for now, you can just think about it as a list model that gets data from Python. And list model, if you don't know QML, is a way to have a list of objects and then render them as a list using other components, for instance, as just a container with data, with all the events when it changes and stuff like that. It has an identifier here called session model, and this identifier is being referred to from Ubuntu list view, which is directly below it. And this list view is, again, a Ubuntu-specific component, but it behaves as you would expect, I think. It just has some extra magic for other Ubuntu-specific components that you can put as list items. So, okay, so this list view has a few properties here. It fills the parent container, so it fills the parent object. So it's just basically it's a full-screen component here. It gets all of the data from the model above, and that's all you need to do to like glue everything that's necessary to get this to work. And if you go down here, there's a delegate. And initially, when I was reading some other code, I wasn't really sure exactly what kind of delegate this is, what this means. But now I understand it's pretty simple. It's just a component, a QML component, that is responsible for displaying, in fact, every single item of your list. So you don't have a list that is composed of different entities. You have a list composed of single item multiplied, as many times as you need to display them. So here I'm using a standard Ubuntu. I think it's not stock QML, it's an Ubuntu extension from the SDK. So it's a subtitle list item, and those get displayed as up to 4 or I think 5 lines of text. The first one is just the text. The text attribute is standard, it's just the name of the session here. Here I'm using the storage ID. I'm going to explain exactly where this is coming from in a second. And there's a subtext that can have additional information. Okay. So to understand how this works in practice, I need to show some Python on the side here. So quickly, let's look at, before even drilling into the Python list model, I'm just gonna look at this function here, get all sessions, because this method, whatever it returns, this function, whatever it returns, will like feed the data. Sorry, will feed the view. Nothing here. Will feed the view with actual data. So let's just go there. Get all sessions is right here. So it's doing something, and I can explain that, but I don't think it's really that interesting. This is really PlayMox API specific. What it's essentially doing is coming up with a list of dictionaries. And I've learned a few confusing things actually just today. I was trying to get all of these things to work here. So Pyotherside is very simple. It's like a bridge between Python and QML, obviously, that can translate very basic types like strings, numbers, booleans, lists, and dictionaries. You can't even translate sets, for instance, so there's no corresponding JavaScript object that would have those features. So you need to think about how you bring your existing Python APIs to that world by just trying to come up with some higher-level API. I mean, you should focus just about the presentation, right? Everything you need to do in practice and very complicated should be in Python without any of these restrictions, and you should just have the presentational data being exchanged back and forth. So here I'm just returning a few bits and pieces of information about sessions. So one particular thing is the storage ID, which is just like a random generated ID for a session. And here you can see this. Just a key in a dictionary, storage ID, and it's actually the same value that we will see available here, because all of these items from that dictionary are in scope in the end from the model. And this delegate has access to the model through this. So things like created, title, storage ID are actually from that model, from those values returned from Python. There's one interesting thing that I didn't really know how to do better. When you see the session list of sessions, you can tap on any of them to go to a details page that shows more information about a single session, right? That would fit in a single list item view. And I wasn't really sure how to do it. How do I get a whole object, and how do I pass it as an argument? And I was trying a couple of things. I read some of the code from the SDK, read some of the examples go around, and I eventually got to this point. So you first get an object from the model, and I'm just referring to the session model here explicitly, using an index variable, which is, again, I mean, one of the confusing bits for me about QML is that there's so many things in scope that are implicit that you need to understand where they are coming from, that it's kind of hard around to browse documentation and just figure out where stuff is coming from. So this index is within scope of the delegate, and it's basically changing as you render subsequent entities on the list, subsequent entries on the list. So it's just incrementing, right, from 0 up to the number of items. So here I'm getting basically the session that I'm tapping on, and I'm just basically getting something similar to this dictionary being returned here. Not entirely the same, similar. And we spent a number of hours trying to get the details really sorted out. I'm creating a new QML component using the session details page file. And initially I didn't really understand how this works, and this is something I think it's worth explaining if you don't know QML and you're just learning as well as I am. So this is like a static declaration. So this is statically defining that within this page there's like a Python list model, and there's a Ubuntu list view here. And these are static. They get created when this component gets created, like the whole page gets created. So anything that happens is predetermined, right? You just can't create more or can't do anything dynamic in this way. Here, I need to create a page. Like I read, like for instance, there are 20 sessions, and I need to be able to create 20 pages every time. Like every time you need to tap on a specific page to see the details, I need to create a page for that session, all the details. So I didn't really know how to do it initially, but from what I read, this is the way to do it. You just call Qt.createComponent and pass it the name of the QML file you want to load. And then using PageStack API, I can push a new page, so the page I just loaded, and you can not really instantiate, but you can seed it with some data, with some additional properties. So this particular page, session detail page, as you will see in a moment, has a property called session, and I'm just passing the session object here. And the actual data here, this session variable will be, I think, list entry, I believe, from QML. So one thing I've learned doing this is that documentation on the Ubuntu website is very confusing, and I had better results by going to official Qt 5 documentation of QML, because it was more comprehensive and had more details and more examples, and it was generally a good. The best solution was to have both around, right? So for reading Ubuntu-specific components, APIs on the Ubuntu website, but reading all the basic QML stuff on the Qt project website. I know that we're trying to incorporate more and more documentation from Qt into the Ubuntu SDK website documentation. So maybe by the time you're watching this will be a done deal. But for me, I had the best experience just having both open at the same time. So this is essentially putting a new page on the stack, and this page will be customized with specific session details. So, I mean, that's really verbose, but really simple. I might jump either to Python list model here or to the session detail page, but I think the Python list model is more interesting. Initially, when I was writing this, every time I need to do something with Python, I had like a separate Python object component being defined, and it was initializing and calling methods, importing modules, calling methods, getting the data out and adding into a model. But as I did it 3 times, I realized this is really something I want to reuse. So I created Python list model, which is really simple. It was the first thing I wrote that I was really useful and really simple. As you can see, it's this short. And I just replace all of that code, and it works flawlessly. So it's a list model. So you can think of it as, I don't know if it's really inheritance or composition. I believe it's more composition, but it's just a list model with additional things in it and additional stuff set up. So it has some like a private property, data loaded. We're going to settle it later, but other than that, it has two properties. One called method name, and the other called method arguments, which defaults to empty list. So you can just, if you don't need any arguments, you don't need to specify it. And the method name is just a Python method name to call, or function name to call. And as you will see here, sorry, no, not here. As you'll see in anything that uses this, for instance, so a session index page, I'm just passing like the module name, which is already imported by the first QML file that also has the Python element, and then the function name inside. So I'm just calling this method. And since this one doesn't need any arguments, that's all I need to do. And in the list model, I have I have a function and I have two signals being defined. So QML is kind enough, actually Qt is kind enough to define signals for every property that you define. So for instance, this is the method name property, and Qt for free gives you an on method name change signal that gets called whenever this changes, right? And equally, you have the on method arguments change signal. And both of these are really, they have really the same goal. Whenever you have both of these set, and they get both assigned, you just want to load, you want to do anything necessary to load the data from Python. And this is interesting and important because when the component gets loaded initially, those will not be set, right? You will create a page, perhaps, that will have like a Python list model, and only after a moment later, when it initializes and binds data from properties and stuff, will those actually be set. So this was really necessary to get the desired behavior. And this is like a single shot thing. So once everything is set, it loads the data, and that's it. You just, yeah, there's also a condition here, so it doesn't load data twice. I mean, that's just fine for what I'm doing. Maybe I'm going to have to change it later, but that's what it does right now. And it just loads the data from Python using this function. It's a JavaScript function, and it's just using py, the name of the Python component from the main QML file, and calls a method on it asynchronously. And it's just passing like method name and method arguments from the properties, and it gets a callback, and defines a callback that will have a result. And it is expected that whatever we call returns some kind of a list. And here we're just iterating over that list and appending everything from that list into the model we are really a part of, and that's it. That's really that's all there is to it. So there are obviously downsides. So this is not like a live model. So you have like a live model that's modeled in Python that can change dynamically. This is not enough to get this mirrored for free to Python. It's possible to do it, perfectly possible to do it to Pyotherside, but what I've been doing, I don't really need that, so I really haven't written anything like that yet. So that's Python list model. It's really simple, and I've been using it in all these cases. So all the data is, almost all of the data is loaded using Python list model. So let's jump to a details page because we're going to do some other interesting things there. So again, one thing we want to keep remembering, we want to remember right now is that I'm passing the session object here, and that was a simple dictionary. Let's just have a look at it again quickly. It's a simple dictionary with a bunch of key value arguments. Most of these are strings or other simple types, but there are exceptions, and the flags are the exception. And maybe I can actually talk about this. Well, I'm going to talk about this while looking at the details QML session detail page. Okay, and this really didn't work for a while because I was struggling to understand what's going on. So the session detail page is really simple. Again, it's a page. It has a property called session that holds the session object. It's composed of a column, and one thing I was and a bunch of things inside. One thing I found I wanted to is, which I haven't really figured out yet, is how to make this flickable. Because unlike Ubuntu list view, which is flickable by default, it has like a flickable component inside. You have to make things flickable explicitly. So I'm gonna later on try to make this thing flickable as I add more So my box just reloaded. I mean, it just crashed and burned. I'm going to resume as soon as it boots again. That's just the status. I'll be back in a second.
Sure, no problem.
So I don't know, maybe while it's still loading, Daniel, do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, I do have a question. You mentioned that Pyotherside runs in another thread, and I'm wondering if maybe this interferes with the use of threads in any way. I mean, for instance, I know that Plainbox uses threads for some like low-level functions when like instantiating a process and trying to process its output, perhaps. Does this interfere in any way, or are those like completely independent?
So technically, when you create a thread in Python on Linux, it creates a system-level thread, but still there's GIL preventing you, so global interpreter lock, preventing you from actually having any concurrency apart from I/O. So they don't interfere in any way. All the threads in Python, you can create as many threads as you like, and they all can use Pythorside's event sending, message sending APIs. So that's really cool. You can like create a worker thread, which is kind of, well, it's kind of silly because you can't really process anything faster, but you just use them for convenience, for instance. And you can send events from them and just gonna get serialized and sent correctly. It all works. Similarly, you can use a worker script, which is a JavaScript API you can use from QML to create a actually parallel thread that's not going to block anything else in JavaScript and can do some computations in pure JavaScript. So, for instance, you have your main thread. Well, there are many threads in QML, so you can have your main JavaScript thread running something, just being the glue integration layer. You can have the Python thread from Pyotherside and any additional threads you created yourself in Python. You can have worker threads from QML and from JavaScript, for instance, processing some of that data in the background, again, without blocking the main view and without blocking the main JavaScript thread, and perhaps processing something faster, because they can run in parallel with everything else, like Python, and they all work together well. So I haven't found any issues with that so far. And my machine is back. It's probably not that much running development release of Ubuntu, like running really recent AMD CPU, which is the problem thing, I think. So just opening the Hangout here again, and I'll be right back.
Sure.
Okay, I'm closing this one and going to the other one. All right. So, more me. Okay. Let's get back to where I was. Checkbox-touch. Okay. Let's screen share that again. Okay, so I was about to show how we pass an object from the session index page to the session detail page. And here it, yeah, whatever. It's just VI telling me it had it open. Thank you, VI. So here it is. I'm sorry, you can hear some noise outside, but there's nothing to do about that right now. So, so a couple of interesting things here. So we get the property called session, which is being set by the other side of QML that is like shoving this on top of the page stack. And from there, we can just access various properties, and you can bind them to the components, so they just get displayed. I mean, this is really very natural. One thing I found as I was writing this, actually, it's not visible here, but in certain cases, I load a bit of the data initially and only load the details later on when you click on something. So I had like multiple properties holding like the basic and the detailed information, and I loaded the detailed information asynchronously. So the bindings there get a little bit more complex. I mean, this is one thing that was very confusing for me initially. I was trying to learn XML and how this all works. Is that what exactly am I writing here? Is this JavaScript or is this something else? And it's really not JavaScript. It's actually QML Qt5 binding. And bindings are powerful, but they're not, arbitrary code that you can write. So this is really simple. It's just binding to the storage ID property of the session object. And you can do conditional bindings. I'm going to show them in a second. I think I have some in the job and provider detail page, I think. but there are limits, and you need to understand what those limits are in order to be able to really, achieve what we want to do. So here I have a very similar situation, but provider, actually not there. Here, provider detail may not be available. So when it's available, I want to display something from that object, right? A property called job count. Otherwise, I just want to have an empty string. I don't want to have anything else. And this is powerful. There are better ways to do it. I mean, more powerful ways to do it. And there's the component called binding, and the binding has like three properties. You have the target, so where you want to bind the value to. So here will be the value property of this single value list item. You have the what, so here it will be this provider detail that job count property. So again, it's a job count property from provider detail, and the when. And the when is interesting because this is not entirely sure if this is JavaScript or something, again, Qt5 specific, how expressive it is. And the when can define, when that binding makes sense. So for instance, if the provider detail is null, you don't want to have any runtime errors. You just want to not bind it at that time. And lastly, so when that is insufficient, you can use property events like we did in the Python list model to just run arbitrary JavaScript and maybe change some properties. So that's the ultimate expressiveness and the ultimate power. But again, those properties, depending on what you need, I think you should use the simplest one. Those properties are available in the Qt Creator SDK. You can really click around and see what they bind to. It's all really useful. So I think it's best to redesign the data you have so that you can take advantage of these things. Okay, back to the session detail page. So again, the checkbox specific stuff here is really basic. Like there's storage ID, application ID, session title, the size of the session file, and flags. And the flags, really, I spent literally 24 hours trying to get flags to work. And flags are totally simple. I mean, conceptually, it's like it's a set of flags you can have, and flag is a string for simplicity. So initially I tried to return a set. That didn't work. So I returned a list instead, and that didn't do what I expected. It worked, but you didn't get lists in the end. And that's a limitation of the list model component from QML. And I found this on Stack Exchange. I probably can find a link in a moment. I'm going to link it to the video later on. So thank you for whoever answered that on Stack Exchange. So when you return an object from Python, like a dictionary from Python, all the values must be strings, booleans, numbers, or other objects. You can't return a list. You can return a list of dictionaries that gets translated to a model again, but you can't return a list of strings because that just doesn't work. I mean, this is the limitation of Qt5 here. So what I did in the end, just to quickly show the corresponding Python codes. Yeah, again, remove it. Actually, I didn't remove it, but anyway. What I did is instead of returning a list of where that is, I'm going to find in a second, flags. Yeah, so instead of returning just the list of those flags, actually I returned, initially it was just like that. I was just returning the flag, and I gave it, like, I returned as a simple dictionary with key name and it's the flag itself. Later on, I discovered I need more data, so I had extra things here, but you can't return just a list of strings this way. It won't work. So that's just a caveat I found. Okay, so session details. So here I wanted to use the Ubuntu SDK component called ListItem.MultiValue. And it's like a string. Sorry, it's like a list item that you can display a tiny list underneath as like a separate line of text. So the main text will say flags, and the other one will show you what the values are. I'm just going to quickly run that and show you how this looks like, and talk about the things that were problematic there. So let's screen share the whole desktop again. I really wish so if you're watching this and you're actually working on the SDK, and you're actually if you're a Google engineer and you're working on Hangouts, could you guys please make it possible to share QML perhaps because it's so frustrating sometimes. So let's go to sessions and this session here, and this is like a multi-value list item. If I had more flags, they will be just appended here with a comma between every one of them. And the thing is that this is not a model. I mean, I was expecting this to be a model, and it's something not. It's just not a model. Yeah, it has to be like a. I believe it has to be a JavaScript array. So what you need to do is to create your own array and show the data yourself. And again, this is something I don't really understand about QML. Here, I mean, so values is just a typical property. So values, and you can bind it to something. And here it's actually, I believe, a JavaScript object that you create, and it's like a function that gets called. And I don't really know when it's being called again. I believe it's just called once, but truly I don't know. And here it's just accessing the model and getting every single item from that model and getting the name property from those flag model objects and returning this array of names. And this is how I got this to work, but it was really, I mean, this is really simple stuff, and I spent way too much time on it than I had hoped to do. So okay, that's the session details page. So quickly, maybe I'm gonna show one interesting thing. So progression is a property you can set on most of these list item, or I believe all of those list item components, and they basically render to this arrow here on the side. So it indicates that there's more to it than that, right? And there's nothing else to it, really. You have to do everything else yourself. So I'm setting the onClicked event, and when you click on it, you do stuff. So here again, we're loading a new Qt component from the flag index page QML file, and we're pushing a new page in the stack with the flags model, which is session.flags is the model for the flags, onto the page stack so that we can display those flags. And since this is both QML and checkbox like a walkthrough, so I'm just gonna quickly show you this page. That's really simple. I mean, one of the things I really like about QML is after you get through the initial hurdles of understanding what you're basically looking at, how do you do basic stuff, it's very, very expressive and very high quality. So, I mean, you just write literally a few lines of code and you have very responsive, animating, fast, UI. And I mean, if you ever did UI in C, UI development in C, I mean, this is just amazing to me. I really love this. So I think QML has lots of potential. The only downside is not enough people really know about it right now. So briefly, so this is again an Ubuntu list view, which has all these nice flicking properties. It's the model that powers this list view is the property called flags, which is something cool. I thought you had to have like a separate model instance and copy the data back and forth, but you can actually just do this because flags is already a model. And every flag will be rendered as a subtitle list item, where the text is the flag itself. So here it's like a submitted, and the subtext is the description of the flag. And we get both of these. So name and description are both bits and pieces, properties, technically properties on the model elements, on list elements. Technically, we get from Python. So yeah, it's just telling that this is results were sent to the certification website in this case. So that's the flag. So that's it for this session, I believe. If we go back to the top, we get providers. And providers are, as I said before, if you're not familiar with plain box, providers are just containers for tests. So you can create your own test descriptions. It can be both manual, can be fully automatic, or anything in between. And you can package them and distribute them around. And then Plainbox and other tools that are built on it can pick them up and use them. So this is the provider page. And you will, again, recognize many of the components I've used before. So those familiar list items. I mean, this is all a list of lists. So I'm sorry, I'm not really that QML savvy yet to write custom components or anything else. I'm just getting started with this, but it really works very well. You can go to job definitions, and most of these is really boring and not specific. One thing I found that is really cool is that initially I was trying to open, like I was trying to get to a point where you can click on the button or something like that and go to a provider website, for instance, to file a bug on it or check if there's a new release or whatever, right? And I was doing this with the web browser module from Python. I was just calling web browser. I believe there's like an open tab or something. I don't remember. It actually worked, but that would probably not work in a touch environment. So I was really looking for something really designed for QML and for Qt5, so that this will all work later on a touch device. And there's fortunately something like it, so let's just jump quickly to provider details page. And this is exactly what renders this button here. It's a list item that's single control, so it's like a list item that you can add a single other control object, like single other QML object to. It's just using a button, so here the control property is set to a button, which is like a static button instance, and it's got a text called provider homepage. And on clicked, I'm just calling this Qt function on the Qt object, which is like a global Qt object with a couple of useful stuff, useful properties on it. Open URL externally, and yeah, it works. So you can click on it, and you just get a browser open, and it's just open Firefox now, which crashed before. But anyway, it works. So that's it. Yeah. So I mean, I'm planning to have a couple of interesting things available this way later on. For instance, you can complete your testing, and there will be a button to just do that, navigate to the page that shows you the details of your test results and stuff like that on the certification website, for instance. Right now, all of this application, this whole UI is really basic. I mean, it's just me experimenting with QML, experimenting with our current Python APIs to do things, and be able to, for instance, see all the data that we have. That's a very simple thing to do initially. One thing I wanted to show you is this provider details page and how it gets, this thing here, job definitions and number to work. So let's close this and focus. Let's close this here and focus on that. So job definitions. So job definitions are defined in a bunch of text files, and we load them, we parse these text files, we validate that. It's all written in Python. It's not terribly fast. And it actually takes like a second to load those 677 job definitions on my machine here. So I found that it was kind of laggy initially. So initially I was loading that when you click on the provider. And if you had a provider like this with like 0 job definitions and 4 test plans, it was very fast. But on the checkbox provider, it was really loading. I had a blank page that suddenly popped up something, and I wanted to have better user experience on that. Yeah. I
have a quick comment / question here. So you say it takes about a second to load the 600 job definitions.
Yep.
Like, we don't have to do this right now or anything, but is this something we would have to optimize on the Python side? I mean, does it impact anything using the plainbox tools, or is it something that happens only when you interface to Qt?
No, it's actually that slow. I mean, this is because all of our tools were traditionally command line driven. They were totally like synchronous, go print, do, print, and stuff like that. You didn't really notice this, but this is something we can improve on Python side. I really didn't write any code on this, but I was theorizing that you could, for instance, have a cache that you can load quickly. You can pre-validate them, so you know that you don't have to revalidate everything that's in the cache already, and you can just store timestamps. I mean, it's just the same things that, for instance, when you have Py and PYC files, right? Like the bytecode itself. So we could like load them, parse them, validate them, and then I don't know, dump them to SQLite database or something like that. Right now, I'm not even looking at this because it's just an optimization we can do later on. But there are ways to get this to work better. Yep, specifically. We can also try to improve our parsing speed, but I think ultimately the best performance is when you just don't have to do things, and that's where we could just cache something as we go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay, that's just a side comment. Okay.
Okay, so jumping back. So so what I did is that I said, okay, we're going to have the basic information about this provider up front from the index page before, but we're going to actually load all of the details, asynchronously while we're already watching this page. So here you can see that the value of, I would just want to display the number of jobs, right? So I have to load them to know that, right? In theory, you could do better, but that's what our Python API is right now. So provided detail is a property that gets assigned asynchronously, and when it's set, we just display the count. And then that's all there is to it to get this behavior. I mean, I'm going to try to just quickly demo this. Let's screen share the whole desktop again. And I'm going to close this and reopen it, and you can see And actually, you can see as well that as it's working, it's going to print stuff. And we can see how long exactly it takes, for instance, to list. So here it loaded all of the providers, and although I actually should. I think there's a way to render the delta between this message in Python and the previous one. I need to do that. It would be very useful not to have to do arithmetics just to do this. Anyway, so let's just click on the checkbox provider, and yeah, it took I think more than a second here. So you can look get provider details to 28,000, so 29,000. It was definitely a second. So without all the threading, without all the asynchronous execution, this would just stall the application. So if you had an animation playing, it would freeze. If you had like anything, the user would try to interact during that time, it would just freeze. And I mean, this is just really great that the design makes this all for free. So
yeah, I just keep asking weird questions about this. I don't know. In our experience, when things seem to not be doing anything, people get desperate. So that's why I'm kind of focusing a bit on the here. Is there any way we can get a notification like for every job that we process? In this way, we can show like a progress bar. Even if it takes just a second to fill the progress bar, at least the user will have a very clear indication of what's happening, rather than like a spinner. That's what's happening. A spinner is usually users interpret a spinner as it's dead. I mean,
sure.
It's not going to recover. So I'm thinking that maybe a progress bar would be interesting to have here.
So
yeah, this is just
right.
Going on the side.
You're absolutely right. There are a couple of things. I mean, this is really a good question. There are a couple of things we can talk about. So first of all, I'd like to see a notification that I'm loading. So for instance, I don't know, maybe there will be some animation playing here that gets replaced when this is available. And I haven't really tried doing this yet, or I'm not even sure if I'm right. But I know that QML has something called states. So you can have a component, and it may have multiple states. And then you can, for instance, do transitions between states. So for instance, state number 0 would be like I'm loading, right? So this could be a spinner or a progress bar or whatever. And state number 2 here would be just the data itself. And then you can do a smooth transition between the two. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, the SDK itself is using those in a number of places, although I can't seem to. I mean, I think it's using them in tabs, although I may be mistaken, but I'm definitely sure they are being used in a couple of places of the SDK to achieve like the smooth transition between different states. So that's one short observation. The other thing is that in Plainbox, we don't really know, in the API, we don't really know how many jobs you have until you load them. So one thing we could do to get this possible, to have a progress bar, would be to store a static number of jobs we have in a provider metadata file, which we can load quickly. And then if you really want to have a progress bar here loading, although to be honest, I wouldn't do it because I think it's just like gimmicky. On a phone, it may be slow, but I think a spinner is just as good enough here. It would, I mean, I think it will be confusing a bit. Then, as you know how many jobs you have, you can really animate that progress bar. And from Python side, you'll need to have a signal that you get every time you load a single job definition. And I think Plainbox API already has this. I'm not using it here, but it's already available. And then in that signal, you would need to send a message using Pyotherside, which would then be captured by this component here, and in that component will update the progress bar accordingly. So this is possible. So what I'm displaying is just the rough state that I have right now. It's certainly not the finished product in any way, and we're definitely going to improve it. I'm just really happy that it's so easy to redo nice UI with QML, and you can really do pleasant things, pleasantly looking user interfaces without that much effort from your end, because Qt is really a great framework and helps you a lot to do it. So just briefly, how this works. So when we load this page, the provider details page, we have two properties. Provider is being set externally when this page gets loaded, and provider details is something we handle ourselves. I know perhaps we should have under provider detail. I'm not really sure if there's like a naming scheme on the QML that people follow. I don't know. So it's interesting. I'm not using the Python list model in this case. I'm just doing a py.call JavaScript call. I'm calling something called get provider details, and I'm passing it a provider name. and this is the first time I'm actually passing a variable, an argument to a function. I'm not actually going to show the provided details page, the get provided details function, because it's not that interesting. It's actually horrible. That's also the one I showed, because I found that we don't have a high-level API that just looks up a provider. Actually, we do have, but there's a bug in it. So anyway, as I'm doing this, I'm finding limitations in our API and hopefully addressing them. All of this is doing is there's a callback that gets called when the Python side call finishes and returns, and we just get the PyProvider variable name for so have them distinguished, and we just assign it to a property, and that's all there is to it. I mean, QML then fires those property changes. Property change signals internally. The bindings here notice that and reevaluate, and this all just works. And you don't have to do anything else. It's that simple. I haven't really implemented test plans yet, so if you click on test plans, that does absolutely nothing. But it's going to be, again, a very similar user experience to those job definitions. So I think that's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, job index page is really similar. As you saw the previous code, there's a Python list model. It loads all of the jobs for a given provider, that's actually passing a provider name as the argument here. There's a different UI, but it's very simple. We push on a new page on the page sec when we tap on a job, and the job detail page is really minimal. I mean, there are lots of things we want to do here, but this is just the verbal version of it. And we don't actually. Oh, actually, we do. Okay, this is something I think just for future. We don't necessarily have to do it because the job object here has everything we need. But we, again, because this is I was just trying things around, we're also loading job information asynchronously here. So while some of these jobs are really boring and don't have enough information, some of them have additional things, and all of these gets loaded. Apart from the ID, all of them get loaded asynchronously. One thing I found as I was playing with this, I really want to have a search field here. Just for purpose of learning QML, I'm going to try to add a search field to this, so you can just tap on the search icon and limit what you're seeing. Because if you have almost 700 job definitions, it's really annoying to just have to flick through them all. One extra bit of information: if you're running this on Ubuntu 14.4, this is not going to look like that because the thing up here is the new header design that some people are blogging about. People are from Canonical are working on this, and it's way better because you have a but button. And previously you had to flip from the bottom to get this toolbar element to show up, and you can click on the back button there. And actually, I can quickly show you how it looks like with the old one. There's a property called use deprecated toolbar. So by default, it's true. So let's just get rid of it here. This definition and restart. And yeah, this is how it looks like on 14.04. I mean, so you can see this toolbar is appearing every time you click on something, and you can't really go back without doing a gesture.
So why is the default use the deprecated toolbar? I mean, that's the first time I've seen that. Just a comment. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, I think it's just not finished yet. And also, I mean, even though it's going to be finished, I think it makes sense because of the Ubuntu Components 01. So I believe that, for instance, when they're going to make a new release, they're going to have Ubuntu Components 02. And if you're using 02, that may be like if you just do this kind of import, maybe you're going to have the default behavior different, right? The default behavior will be the new header bar. But they don't want to break existing applications in any way. They don't want to break their behavior. So this is I mean, you have to be conservative. Anything you add has to be turned off by default. Otherwise, you can get unexpected results just for other apps by updating the framework. That's the whole point of the stable as a case, so that you don't have this, right? So I mean, anyway, I'm using this because this is just great. I want this, and by the time I think this is going to be ready, this will be finished. So I think this is way faster, both on a touch device and on the desktop. On the desktop, actually, the toolbar down here is showing up as you approach the mouse, as the mouse cursor approaches the bottom edge. So you don't have to do a gesture at all. But on a physical device, you actually have to click and drag from the bottom to get that, and that's so annoying just to go browse the content around. So let me quickly have a look at. So maybe I can talk about a couple of things that don't work, and I have no solutions for those so far. So the first thing I've noticed is that this super annoying app ID environment variable thing, like how it won't work, blah blah blah. I don't really know how to get that to work correctly. How do I set app ID? Can I do it? I mean, I think on the phone or on the tablet, this is actually set automatically by Unity 8. On Unity 7 and in general, I don't know how to set it, so it's just annoying every time you see these lines show up, both in Qt Creator and from command lines. Just annoying.
I know that for the old checkbox UI, we set the app ID in the Qt C++ source. I'm not sure if there's an equivalent in QML, but if you look at how the components match, I imagine you would have to set it as a parameter for QML scene. If you ever come up with a runner written in like C, that might be the way to do it. But
I know that we did it in C code. We just set out of it basically. But I think the point for this is you don't have to set it. So just for me, I'm just confused exactly what's the expectation. What a developer should do? Should every single application have a C file just to set this? I think not. So I don't know. Just if any SDK developers are watching this and know the answer, I would love to know.
Maybe when you finally package your application as part of the metadata, you have to set the app ID somewhere. That's so something that comes to mind.
When you do it, when you deploy it on the phone, it actually works. But when you're testing it on the desktop and you're just running it on the desktop, it doesn't work. And I believe it's somehow related to click packaging, but I'm just guessing. So I'm not sure, but I think this is the value you get set in the application name. The other thing is icons. So I mean, as you can see, this is just generic question mark icon, and I'm not entirely sure where to set the icon to. I believe that on the desktop, if you actually build this and install it, you're supposed to have a desktop file, and then the icon gets from that desktop. You can just get the icon, for instance, checkbox, right? And you're gonna have the nice checkbox icon here, but I haven't found a way to get that just without installation, without anything else, to just verify this works. It's a minor thing, but just something I found. Other things, I mean, right now for me, deployment is just broken. So if you run this, if you open Qt Creator, you plug in your device, you create a. Let's just show this because I'm just talking and theoretical stuff, and it's way easier to show how this doesn't work. So let's just get Qt Creator open. It takes a while because I don't have an SSD here, but it's here. Okay, so this is Qt Creator. Let's open the project we had in recent projects here, and here we can have devices, right? So this is, since I just moved, and this is not my typical desktop, and I don't have a device set up here. At home, I had like a ARM emulator, Intel emulator, and a real device. So when you have a real device, you have this this shortcut Control Shift F12 or Control F12. I don't really remember where that was, but it was definitely somewhere around here. Anyway, there was a way to deploy it on the device, and that just wouldn't work for me. As I said, I'm running 14.10, so maybe it works in 14.04. But since I'm really interested in 14.10 and getting new stuff ready, I just had the experience that it doesn't work at all. There's a bug that Rick Spencer opened on it. I'm just going to link it to the video. So if you're watching this later, you can probably find all the interesting links below the video on YouTube. And right now, it's kind of annoying. What I found that actually did work is that I can't remember what this was because I'm not really doing this stuff. But I was creating a click package somehow through here and deploying that click package manually, and that worked. And I could then just tap on it, and it was there. Maybe I can even show that really quickly. I mean, I'm not really going to show the thing working because there's something wrong with it and it really doesn't do stuff. But I mean, it's definitely here. It doesn't have an icon. It's the one without the icon right here. If you tap on it, did I tap on it? No, tap on music. This is the same time I'd like to have a camera behind me. You can just go here, and that's the thing. So you can deploy it, but It just, it's not as smooth as I'd like it to be. So if you know how to get this to work, please tell me, because I would love to use it. And that's about it as far as the walkthrough was concerned. The code I was showing is on a branch in Launchpad. The project is called the project is called Checkbox. So you can branch with Bazaar by branching LP Checkbox. And the branch I was just showing is a merge request. I'm going to link to the merge request as well in the video, so you can have a look at the code. You can comment, you can give feedback, you can play with it if you want to. And I guess that's the first video. How long is it? It's my first video. I don't know. There's no timer around.
I think about 40 minutes or something like that. 40, 45.
Right. So I don't know. Not too bad, not too long. I'm gonna do some more follow-up videos on both Checkbox itself and on some other topics. So if you're interested, have a look at that. And for now, thank you, and see you around.
Thanks. It was pretty interesting. Thank you.